I hope you guys are all doing really well. This is episode 92. My name is Rachel. I can be found pretty much everywhere as well for pearls. Welcome to Wool and Spinning. It is Tuesday, March 20th. We are live streaming in the morning today, which is unusual for us. We usually live stream in the afternoon. So to those who are joining us, thank you so much for adjusting to this weird time. It's only because the kids are at camp this morning. We're on spring break here. And our spring break is 2 weeks long. So the kids are off this week and next week, and it correlates with Easter. So they're not back until the Tuesday after Easter. So I did put them in a little preschool camp today. James is actually technically too old for it, but it's 3 to 5. And because he is still 5, he was able to go. So that was really nice for him. He is turning 6 in July. So this will be one of the last times he can go to a preschool camp. So anyways, he's there for 2 hours, so I've got a little bit of time, and then I'm going to hopefully make lunch and start dinner, and then I'll go and pick them up. So I have a few things that I wanted to chat about today. I have some finished objects to chat about, and I thought we would sort of focus the show on that. I didn't do an Ask Anything today because I haven't it's crazy because the Ask Anything thread in Ravelry, you guys are so quick to jump in and help each other and to answer a lot of questions that by the time I have a chance to sort of formulate an answer and maybe talk about it on the show, it's already been answered. So I really appreciate you guys in the community doing that. Thank you so much, and keep it up. That's just fantastic. So that's great. All right, I do want to just cover one housekeeping thing. We have our Smith & You 4 ounces, 100 grams of pencil roving. I chatted about this last time. It's Superwash BFL. It's dyed by my friend Marianne up in Kamloops, British Columbia. Just pop into the Ravelry group and look under the March episode thread, and you can pop in there and say what are some first signs of spring in your area of the world, and if you're in the southern hemisphere, what are some first signs of fall. I know my friend Nina posted on Instagram the other day that it's getting closer to that time of year when she's pulling out her shawls because she's down in Santiago in Chile. So that was kind of fun to see because of course their seasons are opposite to us, and when we were down there in our spring, it was their fall. We were there at this time of year, and it was just gorgeous. The weather was incredible. So but it was definitely getting into I was wearing a blazer, like a jacket every evening. We didn't need like rain jackets or anything like we do here, but I was wearing my a jacket every evening and a shawl, and it definitely cooled down. So unlike here, which is getting warmer and warmer. All right, so today I've got a finished knitted object, which never happens. And it's actually sitting right here next to me. And I have some finished yarn, so let's jump into the show. And I really need some coffee, otherwise I'm gonna start coughing. Our house is super dry right now, I'm not sure why, but my husband and I have both been coughing a lot. So we've got Candy in the chat channel. We've got Suzanne, Wayward Leaf. I can't remember your first name, Wayward Leaf. I know exactly who you are. I just can't remember your first name. Welcome to all of you. Candy is sneaking in, tuning at work. So hopefully you can watch and not get interrupted, Candy. Where should we start? Do you guys want to start with yarn, or do you want to start with my finished shawl? I don't mind. You guys can say. We've got a couple minutes to decide. Well, not minutes, but you know what I mean. A couple of seconds. I have, I don't actually have a ton to talk about today. I'm kind of between projects, so I thought I would show you what I've been prepping for my next spinning project that I'm going to take with me Fibers West shawl. Okay, Suzanne, you were the quickest. Fibers West here in the Lower Mainland is this coming weekend. It's this Friday and Saturday. And I've been prepping a spin to take with me to work on because I'm going to be helping Katrina in their booth at Knit City, or at Fibers West. So that's going to be a lot of fun. And I thought, well, I may as well take a spin with me, and then because Sunday usually tends to be, or Saturday, sorry, tends to be a little bit quieter. So I thought, oh, I'll be able to spin. So I have a finished object here. I'm not going to change the cameras around just yet because I thought that I would show you on the big camera how big this ended up turning out. So this is my spin that was all of that yarn that I had made. My friend Charlotte, oh, and did you see what the kids did to my table? Drives me batty. This was all of that yarn that I spun that was my friend Charlotte had poured a whole bunch of dye onto some leftover Superwash BFL. It was bits and pieces at Sweet Georgia at the studio. She's one of the dyers. And I spun it all up, and it's roughly 150 grams. I haven't weighed it yet. This thing is actually still damp. I can feel the wetness. So I unpinned it, and it's almost dry, but it is still a bit wet. And but for you guys, I wanted to make sure that you saw it. So this is sort of what it looks like. I'll stand up here. It's big. It's not draping properly because of course it's still wet. But that's what it looks like on. It's nice and big. I just love the colors. I knit another shawl a couple of years ago that was out of all of those batlings that I made. I'll pull it up on Ravelry. I made all those batlings, and I knit that vanilla shawl that was all of the words, Rachel. It was all of the I did the vanilla shawl, and then I did the big garter border as well. Let me just pull up my projects here. It's because I'm doing two things at once, so I can't talk and do this at the same time. Anyways, I wanted a shawl that was very similar to that, but with a slightly different stitch pattern. Mostly just because stockinette's not super fun to knit over and over and over again, and I find it really hard on my wrist. So I was trying to minimize the amount of purling rows that I had to do. So with this one, I only did a purl row every 8 rows. So the 8th row was always a purl row. You guys remember this shawl? Remember that one? I don't know if it's going to focus. Here, let's see if I can put it here. Remember that one? And it was all those little batlings, and it was that big vanilla shawl, and then it had that big garter stitch border, and it was absolutely massive. So when I had it on, it looked like a big blanket shawl. Like, this is it around my neck. I mean, it's just absolutely massive. And like that was with it all wrapped underneath, so that it kind of looks like a bit of a cowl. So I wanted that same size with this one, and I didn't know if I had enough yarn, and this yarn was quite a bit more gently spun, so that was quite a high twist. It wasn't ropey, but it was definitely higher twist. Next show, let me write this down. Next show, I will bring to show you. Oh, and see, the kids got into my book too. A comparison of the yarns. And then you can see, because I have some of this left over. And you'll see the difference of between the yarns, because the other yarn was really, really tightly twisted, and it was a much denser yarn. And I, of course, was a much newer spinner. Like, I knit this back in the beginning of 2016, so exactly 2 years ago, but I spun the yarn about 3 years ago. So much more like, it was just a denser yarn, and it was lots and lots of twist in the singles, lots and lots of twist in the plying. Whereas with this yarn, now this is, granted this is still wet, this yarn is much more gently plied, and you can see sort of, this is unraveled a bit because of course it's wet. It was wet and now it's sort of undone itself, but you can see this is a much gentler twist. It's a much finer yarn. It's much lighter, like even though this is still damp and still wet. I'll switch the cameras around. I need Eve here to remind me. You can see that the fabric is quite a bit thinner. Like you can see my hand underneath there. And it's airy and it's light and it's just not as dense, and yet it's the same size, and even being damp and wet, it feels significantly lighter, which is really interesting because the weight of the yarn is the same. These are both fingering weight yarns, and yet this is significantly lighter and significantly less dense. The other thing that I was worried about, and one of the reasons why I kept the stitch pattern really super simple, was I was really worried about this striping that's in here. I was worried about it competing with any type of a stitch pattern. So with this, like this light blue in here, for example, it ended up being really, like from a distance, it's really, it gives the shawl a bit of interest and it's a little bit tonal, without taking away from sort of some of this garter stitch in here, because I was really, like I said, trying to save my wrist. I don't know how many stitches I got to in the border. The border stitches were, I ended up with 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, so 32 rows of garter stitch, so 16 garter stitch bumps. And I did run out of yarn, so I have just I ran out of yarn in the sense that if I'd gone any further, I would have run out halfway through the row. So I finished off the row and then I cast off, and I have a couple of yards left of yarn, I'm sure, enough to calculate the grist. But even with the garter stitch border at the end, it doesn't take away from the yarn, like from the colors in the yarn, because I was really worried that this would just get too textured and there'd just be too much going on. But in the end, it actually worked out quite well. And when I blocked it, I've blocked it to within an inch of its life. It's still wet, so I'm gonna have to put it back and let it block until it's finished drying. But it's not too bad. Unfortunately, the camera can't really pick up all these blues really super well. It's just not a very easy palette for the camera to pick up. But I think I cast this on back in September, and I've only been working on it at James's soccer practice and at his swimming lessons and Nora's swimming lessons once in a while. But I've been reading a lot recently, and often the only times I get to read are during those times. So because it's soccer practice, all of the mums visit, I've been working on this there, but I really haven't been working on it otherwise. And as a result, this took forever to finish. So I'm not sure how it's going to wear, because it is loosely spun. It wasn't super tightly spun. And I didn't put tons and tons of ply twist into it. The ply twist was very gentle. So it'll be interesting to see if it fuzzes up, especially around the collar when I'm wearing it. Like if I wear it like this, it's going to really fuzz up around here, especially in a coat or a jacket. So I'll have to report back because the other one is really tightly spun. And so, of course, it's wearing really well. It still looks like it's brand new. But it'll be interesting to see if this one does the same, because I can see that this, because these are totally my colors, I can see that it's going to get worn a lot. The other thing I was going to show you, remember we talked about the hack to starting a garter stitch border. So I had said, if you don't want to do a garter stitch tab start on, you can just seam it up at the end. That's what it looks like in the end. So that's how it's all seamed. And if you're wondering about more to what we talked about, that was from a couple of episodes ago when we talked about how to do this, and you just cast on stitches and then you seam them up at the end. So that's how that turned out. And I mean, nobody would ever be the wiser. You'd never be able to see it, but it turned out really well. And then I just have to finish up my So in my ends, I only have one spot where the yarn actually broke. And then this is the other spot where I attach the second skein. So I just have to weave those ends in, and then I'm off to the races. I'm done. So that's that shawl. It's definitely soft. The drape is incredible. So another word for flowy is drape. Sharon said it looks flowy. Is that the word? Yeah, drape is sort of the word that we use when we talk about that. Yeah, Suzanne said the desk art artwork makes you laugh. Yeah, that's courtesy of Nora. Oh, so frustrating. Anyways, yeah, the camera sort of picks it up as being very grainy, but it's I'll take some better photos of it, and when it's dry, and I'll pop those into the show next time so that you guys can see what it actually looks like, because it's kind of coming up a little bit grainy, but that's okay. But yeah, it's very, very drapey, very soft, and I think it's going to be one of those shawls that I wear all the time. So yeah, I'm excited to show my friend Charlotte too, because she poured the dye on. Like, she didn't have any rhyme or reason how she added the dye. She was just playing around with leftover dye. And talk about an absolutely gorgeous spin. If you guys want, I'll show you really quickly before we move on what the fiber looked like originally, and then you can see the difference. You know, what it looks like from the fiber, and then what it looks like spun up. Because I do have my phone right here. Sometimes I don't have my phone. You know what? I don't have any pictures on my phone of the fiber. I only have the yarn. So this is what the yarn looked like. So that was the original yarn. So it's lots of places of marling. That gold really came out in the yarn. When you look at this from a distance, it's definitely a soft teal. It definitely looks blue. But man, one of my favorite spins this past year. It was definitely one of my favorite spins, and this is definitely one of my favorite projects that I've ever made, because I spun this in May of 2017, and I finished it in July. And I started this shawl in September, and then I just cast it off this past weekend. So definitely one of my favorite projects that I've made in a long time, and worth the fact that it took so long. So yeah, so thank you for letting me share. I'm just going to put this somewhere that it's not going to get everything wet. There we go. All right, let's talk about finished yarn. I am so excited about this yarn. It's finished. I love it. It's kind of funny, hey, how we go in fits and spurts, because I find that sometimes I make a bunch of stuff and it's like, yeah, it's nice. Yeah, it's okay. Yeah, I enjoyed that. I found my Romney mohair spin that I just finished was kind of like that. Like, I finished it and I was like, all right, that's done. Like, it wasn't really one of those projects that I was like super excited about when I finished. And I think part of it is because I don't know what I'm going to do with it. Like, I don't have a follow-up knitting or weaving project with it, and I'm still really torn about whether I want to weave with it or whether I want to knit with it. So I always feel that sort of a little bit of trepidation between what I'm going to do with my projects when I finish versus being really excited about a spin when it's done and being really excited about the next step. This, I know exactly what I'm going to do with it. So I'm going to have we're just going to do a little fun. How many yards do you think this is? Just from like eyeballing it, it's a massive, massive skein. I'll put it next to my head so you can see how big it is. The skein is huge. Let's see if anybody can guess. Just for fun. See if you guys can think of how many yards it is. And I actually spun this. This is my first spin off of my Ashford e-spinner. So this is the first complete spin. I really had to crank up the speed to get enough ply twist in, and I might actually throw it through one more time. But I'm going to do a test sample and just do a big swatch and see what it looks like before I start tightening it up, because it's a merino silk nylon alpaca blend. I dyed this myself. I thought for sure it was fulled and that it was felted, but when I started spinning, it was obviously superwash merino, because it didn't say on the label whether it was actually superwash merino or not. And so as I was spinning, or when I started doing my little sample skein, which I think I have right here actually, I realized that it was fine, because I was worried I was going to have to card it up and open it back up again. But when I did this little sample skein, which is right here, it was fine. So I thought, you know what, I'm just going to spin it short backward, smooth it as I go. This is the fiber content, so it's 55% merino, and it doesn't say superwash merino, but it is, because if it wasn't, it would have been completely felted, because I really roughed this up when I was dyeing by accident. I was learning, I didn't know what I was doing, blah, blah, blah. 20% alpaca, which I think is why it felt fulled, because I think the alpaca was a little bit compacted from the way that I dyed it. 20% nylon, which is pretty high, and then 5% silk top. And I had a pound of it originally, but this has ended up being half a pound spun. So this is 230 grams, because I weighed it this morning. And Tessa is actually right. So she guessed 1,100 yards, and it worked out to 1,050 yards. It's a huge amount of yarn. So now I don't know. My original plan was to do, I think it's called Quill. Let me see if I can pull it up. My concern is the miles and miles of garter stitch, which is why I'm I already own the pattern, but there's a part of me that's like, do I really want to knit this? Because of the miles and miles and miles of garter stitch. So this is a Brooklyn tweed pattern. Some of you will recognize it. It's all variations of garter stitch. So there's some feather and fan in there, and then there's a knitted on border at the end. It's a beautiful shawl. This would be really nice because you can see from a distance, it's very, very gentle pastel. Even the lime green that's in it, it's like a yellowy, limey that's in here. It's very, very muted from a distance, and I'll unskein this in just a sec. But this is one of those shawls that you do the garter stitch, you do it a square. This is a great photo of it so that you can really see. It's a hap. You knit the square, and then you do the feather and fan border. Well, that didn't work. You do the feather and fan border, and then you do the knitted on border after. The yardage for this is, I think, 1,000. It's a massive amount of yardage. Main color, you need 1,300 yards, and that's sort of being, and for the smaller version, you need approximately 1,100 yards of fingering weight wool. So I sort of thought, well, if I do the smaller version, which is the cream one, the one that I just showed you, that's the dark, that's the large version, but I thought it would be really pretty, and I wouldn't have a bunch of different colors. I'd just knit this. My concern is just how much knitting that shawl is. It would probably take me 5 years to finish. So I'm going to keep thinking about it, because it is a gorgeous shawl, and I do have the pattern, and it's one of my favorite hap patterns that has ever been published. So this is, I haven't washed this yet, and actually, because it's been skeined, it's lost some of its twist. But yesterday when I took it off the wheel, it twisted like that twice, but it's just sort of rested overnight. And I'll move this. This was my original Spinner's Control card. So these were my singles. I was spinning my singles to roughly 28 wraps per inch, because I wanted a finished yarn of roughly 18 wraps per inch. So this was my sample, and which I've shown on the show before, and then this was the finished yarn. So this is what I think makes this yarn amazing. If you look in there, and I'll refocus the camera, if you look in here, there's all these little hits of that pinky purple color, and it's just gorgeous. And it's just like little short spurts. They're not long, like this length here goes from here to here. And then the rest of the yarn is just these yellows and blues and greens, and so it sort of has this overall feeling of being, I don't know if I would call this teal. I would almost call this sort of more like a seafoam maybe. It's definitely not like Tiffany blue, but it's because that type of seafoam blue is much darker and brighter. This is a very soft pastel-y. Maybe somebody in the chat has a really good name for it, because it's not baby blue, but that yellow that's in there that's kind of become green from mixing kind of gives it like this seafoam color. It almost looks like that. It looks like that algae that you see on the rocks at the beach. That's sort of like that greeny yellow. It's not really teal. Yeah, sage is maybe a good word for it, because it's almost got this like it's very pastel-y, and then with those hits of that pink that turned into purple when it mixed with the blue, it's just very gentle. I don't know if I have any photos of the original fiber. I've posted it on the show before. Like I've had it in I think I posted it last week actually. So some of you will remember, because I did just post it. Oh, here's the original fiber. I do have it. I'm getting smart. I'm getting better about posting my photos. I find sometimes I just forget to put up a lot of photos. So this is the original fiber. This was the original fiber that I dyed. And I actually had no idea how much I had left. But you can see how much more muted it's become. So this is the picture of the dyed fiber. Put that down there. Cover Nora's artwork for a sec. Oh. And then you can see up here next to it, see how different it is. It's just completely muted. And it's all those white sections of the fiber that I left that mixed with those darker colors and created such a light pastel-y yarn. But it's still interesting. Like in real life, it's still interesting. It's got some really interesting places. And I don't know if I can bring it closer and you guys can really see, because the light is right there. I think it'll just blow it out. But yeah, I'm really, really happy with how this turned out. Like I said, I haven't washed it yet, so I'm not sure if I put enough twist into it. But overall, I've checked it in several different places, and it is 18 wraps per inch. So it is I would call this a heavy fingering, light sport weight yarn. And I think it's going to bloom even more when I wash it. So we'll see. I'll have to reskein it and see how much I actually have for yardage. Some reflections I have about my Ashford e-spinner. So because this is the first full spin that I did on it, so I'll just leave this here and you guys can gaze at it while I'm talking. And if anybody has any questions about the e-spinner, please just ask. I don't mind answering. So when you're working with e-spinners, and when you're working with anything that's automated where you're not treadling, I've talked about this on the show before, so go back to some of the episodes that were aired probably 2015 into 2016, I think, when I still had my Hanson mini spinner before I sold it. When you set the tension and when you set your speed and you press on, so you press the pedal if you have a pedal on your e-spinner, or if you press on the actual machine, it's going to pull and it's going to keep spinning no matter what you do. So I've really found for me that giving myself more distance and more space between me and the machine really helps, because as that twist is building up, if you kind of get like you're having trouble drafting with something, or you're taking a moment, or there whatever's going on sort of here in your fingers, you've sort of got all this distance for the twist to build up and to spread before you sort of keep going again. And one of the things that's sort of out there in terms of like one of the advantages to e-spinners is that there's no more ratios, there's no more whirls, you don't have to worry about how much twist is going in. But I actually find that really difficult to spin a really consistent yarn. So I felt like with this yarn, it's going to be for a shawl. I originally was thinking I would spin it for socks. It is sock fiber. That was sort of what the blend was made for. It's got all that nylon in it. But in the end, my biggest thing was I'm just going to strip it down so that each nest that I strip down is as consistent as possible. And I showed that on the show, how I had prepped this spin. And then from there, I just tried to keep my draft really consistent. So, drafting forward, not drafting too long, keeping all of my stuff sort of as consistent as possible. As I moved back, I tried to be really sort of like rhythmic. It's almost like you're in a tempo, like you're do, like a tempo, right? Anybody who does any sort of tempo work at the gym or takes a step class, that's all tempo. And I found that what that meant was, in the end, I have a relatively consistent yarn. When I was plying, though, I really had to crank up the speed, because as soon as those two strands meet, your knee-jerk reaction is just put it in the wheel, because it's pulling no matter what, right? And so I have ended up with some areas of this yarn that are underplied. And I'm going to have to decide what I'm going to do about that. Like, am I going to go back and just fix those sections and tighten them up? Like I would on a spindle. That was some teaching content from last year, how to do that. Here's another underplied area. Or am I just going to leave it, and I can either fix it when I go to knit with it, or I can just ignore it and flip over the skein and not look at it. Because I think that when you're plying on some of these wheels, because you're not counting treadles anymore, right? And you're not sort of working along a set length where you know that, okay, it's 12 inches. I'm going to add, let's say, just arbitrarily, especially for plying, I'm going to add 4 treadles per 12 inches. So, out 1, 2, 3, 4, in, 1, 2, 3, 4, in. With the e-spinners, you're adding that twist. So unless you're really watching how that twist angle is tightening up every single time and being really, really, really diligent, which when you're plying 1,200 yards of yarn is a bit difficult to stay that present and that focused. And I had the kids interrupting me every 5 minutes, and I was spinning outside on the steps, and I'll insert some video next time to show you what that looked like. And so I had it on our balcony, and I was sitting sort of next to it, and I was just spinning and plying there, because I really wanted to get this done for today's show, which is why it's not washed. It's hard to sort of stay present like that and to ensure that you're adding as much twist as you need every single time, particularly in the plying. I find with plying, I really zone out. I know some people absolutely love plying. I used to love plying. It's not my favorite thing anymore to do. Plying is sort of one of those things I do because I have to. And I think a lot of it is because I'm always... I find more often than not now, I'm more interested in the singles that I'm spinning because I'm working with a different fiber, or I'm trying something new, or it's a new blend, or the colors are interesting, or, and then it's sort of when you get to plying, it's like, oh, okay, if I have to, which is sort of interesting. I'm just going to read what Rebecca just wrote because she's got a comment here. It sounds like a timing thing as well. You'd have to be consistent in your length of plying draft and get your tempo. Tempo is hard for me to keep consistent between different times of the day. Absolutely. So like I find I'm way fresher in the morning, but I don't necessarily want to sit there in the morning and ply. So I think in the morning I would be more able to stay present and to do it. But the morning it's a busy time for one, and I'm fresh. So I don't want to sit in the morning particularly. Like the morning tends to be my time to be more busy and to do stuff. I go to the gym in the morning, I get the kids to school, Nora and I'll go for a walk, or we'll go out to the park or something. It's not really a time that I want to sit. Whereas the afternoon, when I'm sort of wanting to wind down a little bit before we pick up James, tends to be the time that I will sit down at my wheel if I have a chance to during the day. And I'm much less present at that time of the day because it's after lunch and it's getting to be that sort of quieter time. Nora needs the quiet. So it's interesting. So to answer Eve's question, it's not lace weight, it's actually a light fingering or a heavy fingering light sport. And I think right now it looks like it's a lace weight because it's there's some places in here that are quite fine, but once I wash it, it'll bloom. And a lot of that's because of the merino in there. And the alpaca will add a little bit of sheen, the silk in there, and the nylon will add a bit of sheen. I can totally see why this is sort of marketed as socks, sock fiber, because it should be quite well hard wearing, but I decided instead of doing a 3-ply to do a 2-ply so that I could do a big shawl with it. So this was one of the first fibers that I dyed actually after that course that I took back in November 2014. I really enjoyed doing it. I'm not huge into dyeing. It's not my favorite thing to do, but it was really fun to work with these colors because these were dyes that were sent to me from Gay Wool Dyes. I think they're based in New Zealand. They sent me a package way back in the beginning of 2015 and 2014. And so I had some of the stuff left around that time and I played with it. And these were some of the dye experiments that I ended up with. You guys might remember, for those of you who've been around right from the beginning of the podcast, back in 2014-15, that was when I was playing with all this stuff. And when I first shared some of these home dyeing experiments, I think I'm actually going to look because I remember that I had an episode that was called Dyeing All the Things. And I shared all of these experiments that I had worked on way back then. And I remember like it was an entire episode. I didn't have any spinning that I talked about. And I think I had like 4 or 5 braids that I had dyed. All that stuff that I dyed after that course. And I've already spun up the Wensleydale that I dyed of all that stuff. And then I also, and then this is the next one. And then I still have some Wensleydale that was like a green color that I haven't spun. Yeah, Dyeing to Dye. So it was episode 11.2. If you're interested in going back and seeing these dyeing experiments, it was episode 11.2. And then I spun up all that Wensleydale that I dyed. And it was one of my favorite spins that I've ever done as well. And it's funny when people talk about like how much they love working with their own dyed fiber. I totally get it because I really have enjoyed working with my own stuff. It's sort of this whole other foray. This was the Wensleydale that I dyed. I'm not sure if that's going to focus. Anyways, that was the Wensleydale. You guys might recognize it. It was all those purples and reds and pinks. It wasn't red, sorry, it was pink and purple. And then there was a yellow in there and it looked like, kind of looked like fire. It was really cool. I still haven't done anything with it. It just sits on my mantle and I stare at it and think how pretty it is. I don't know if I'll ever knit with that yarn because I just love it so much. All right. Does anybody have any questions about any of this that I talked about today? I was going to share with you some of the fiber that I've been prepping. So we'll do that really quick before we say goodbye. So I can't reach it, so I'm just going to grab it. You guys were saying you get mesmerized watching your plying and you zone out. Yeah, I totally zone out when I'm plying. I totally agree. And one of the other things actually that I find is I'm finding it really hard to sit for long periods of time. Like I'm just not into the sitting. We made a decision back last year, almost a year ago, but I didn't really take it seriously for the first little while, but we really made a conscious decision that we weren't going to be quite so sedentary. I really default towards being sedentary. Like I've always been very happy to sit and do my hobbies and my crafting and stuff. And Mike and I were both just feeling like it was getting to be too much of a habit. And so I really made a conscious effort to start to change that last summer. The problem is that as it becomes more and more of a habit and as it becomes more and more natural to move more, it gets harder and harder to sit. So, and that was one of the reasons why for getting the e-spinner was because then I could move around a bit more. I could stand when I was spinning, blah, blah, blah. But I definitely have found it difficult to sit as much at my wheels as I was. And it's funny because my Susie and my Lendrum both have projects on them right now. My Susie has this one that I'm going to show you next. And my Lendrum has my Rami Spin. And I haven't really worked on them. And a lot of it's because I just can't sit that much anymore. We've really been changing our lifestyle and changing our habits and whatnot. And it's funny how some of this other stuff starts to filter, like those changes start to filter down into this other stuff that we do, for better or for worse. So this spin, I don't have the other fiber that I started with, so I'll try and remember to grab that for you guys next show. But I have been prepping this on my hackles, and I do think of it as work, actually, Eve. So Eve had a great suggestion. Can you think of it a little more as work, and then you might find it easier to sit at your wheel? I do actually think about it as work, because I have stuff that I want to get done for the show, and I have you guys to think about and all that kind of stuff. It's still, I just find it really, I get really fidgety. I sit there and I kind of, and Mike's like, what are you doing? Sit still. And I just find it difficult to sit still. So this is Harvest Moon, which is a colorway that Katrina dyes, and it's on Superwash BFL. And then you'll see in there I've got these like streaks of this sort of darker, it's a darker like ochre yellow, but it also has some hints of green in it. So like this one has some green, but the camera's not really going to pick it up because it's right in there. Where is it? Right in here. And they're just like these little tiny streaks of like dirty green. You can see some there. Anyways, I've been hackling these and I've been combining them. So you guys are probably wondering what those streaks of stuff is. You can really see it there. So this is Superwash BFL on the Harvest Moon colorway. And Katrina dyed that up for me. I asked her specifically if she could do that for me, and she said, yeah, absolutely, no problem. So she did that for me. And then the fiber that it's combined with is a microfiber. It's called vegan cashmere, quote unquote. And Heidi of Vegan Yarns, my friend Heidi, she's been on Wool and Spinning Radio. She actually carries it, and it's sort of this alternative to real cashmere. That comes from goats. And it's also, because it's a microfiber, it's great for socks. It's got some wicking properties. And so anyways, I'm going to spin up a pair of socks out of this. So I hackled them together. I did layers. I did a layer of BFL, a layer of the vegan cashmere, a layer of the BFL, and the layer of the vegan cashmere. And then I dizzed it off. And I've been making these nests. And so I have in total about 100 grams here, because the vegan cashmere is a little bit more dense. It's very, very light and airy, but weight wise it's a little bit more dense. So this is about 100 grams. I'm going to spin this up and I'm going to see whether I want to make more or not, because I still have another half of the Superwash BFL, and I also have another half of the vegan cashmere, but I didn't want to use it all up in one project. I was sort of thinking that I would do one project with this stuff, and then I'd knit some socks and I'd wear them and see how they wore and whether or not I wanted to make more. Because I tend to like lower rise socks anyways. I don't usually need a whole 100 grams for a sock spin, but I thought, well, I'll start with this 100 grams and then I'll go from there. So, oh, Suzanne, to answer your question, ochre, O-C-H-R-E, ochre. So I think that I will start, this is on my Susie right now, and I'm thinking that because this is one of Katrina's colorways, I'm thinking that I'll work on this at Fibers West. So I've only started one nest. I have a little bit of it left here, and it's been really fun so far to play with and to spin. It's a little bit difficult to get, like when I'm spinning, I notice that like I'm spinning through the BFL, and then I'll come to a chunk of the vegan cashmere, and it sort of feels a little bit different to spin. And the vegan cashmere is a man-made fiber, and it's produced in a sustainable, environmentally friendly way. And it has no staple length, like no sort of staple length per se, although it is sort of a set length. But there's no like scales, because it's Superwash BFL. There's nothing for it to like, for all of it to grab to. So I'm spinning it really high twist. So I'm using my fastest whirl on my Susie, which is, can't remember if it's 27 to 1, 28 to 1. What is it? Oh, I don't have it on here. I always have a piece of tape with my, with the whorls, so that I know what they are. But it's come off. I don't know where my piece of tape has gone. I think it's 28-1. So anyway, so yeah, it's a type of microfiber. Yes, I did say microfiber, Eve. And it's produced, I think Heidi said it's produced, no, I can't remember, so I don't want to say something that's not accurate. Anyways, I'm just going to spin this up and see how it wears in socks. And I know one of the reasons why she carries it is because it is environmentally sustainable. It's produced in an environmentally sustainable way, blah, blah, blah. And I just thought it'd be really fun to play with and to see sort of how it blends in with the BFL and what the effect is on the socks. Like, do they really, work? Are they more hard wearing? What kind of the yarn does it make? I'm going to do a 3-ply. I'm probably going to spin, just because I'll be at Fibers West with Katrina, I'm probably going to spin it all to 1 bobbin and then chain ply, probably just for ease. Yeah, so we'll see. There's a couple of questions in the chat thread, so I'm just going to answer them and then we're going to say goodbye because I know time is getting on. I blended faux or vegan cashmere, but I carded it rather than hackling it so it was more blended. Yeah, I did think about carding it. I ended up with a bunch of waste off of my hackles, and so because that's sort of carded, because it's all this like waste off of my hackles, I was thinking I would throw it onto my drum carder and I would make a whole bunch of like because there's a lot of waste off of it. I thought I would make some bats and have like the 2 samples side by side. So that's actually why I didn't drum card this, because I knew I would have waste, and it's also why I didn't mix the other 100 grams together. I sort of thought, well, if I do 100 grams of combed and then 100 grams of carded, and then I can compare the 2 yarns and see what they're like and how different they are. I'm not sure, Eve, about the fibers being lost in the wash and entering the water system. It was something that I was going to ask Heidi about next time I see her, because it's something that she's very aware of. And she, that's one of the things that she often asks her distributors and stuff is about what happens to the water after and all of that. So I'll ask her and I'll see if I can try and follow up. Because I know all these microplastics and stuff that are going into our water system are really, really bad. So it's something to be aware of. I think that's it for today. I'm starting to lose my voice for some reason. I don't know why. I think it's all of this dry fiber that's around. And I've mentioned this before on the podcast, but I am mildly allergic to alpaca. So I always get like sneezy afterwards. So I will say goodbye. Thank you so much to you guys for being here in the chat channel. I really appreciate you accommodating the different time and accommodating the change in time. And I really hope that you guys have a wonderful weekend and lots and lots of spinning gets done. For those who are going to be at Fibers West, please come and say hello. Don't forget to come and introduce yourselves to me and Katrina. We'll be in the Crafty Jacks booth. And oh, Suzanne has a good question. I always assumed that I always sort of assumed that vegan is generally compostable. Not necessarily. It just means there's no animals that were involved in the process. So yeah, that is a common misconception. And yeah, Tessa, I hope I see you at Fibers West, and I hope you guys have an awesome weekend. And I am going to be there both days, Carissa, so I'll be there on Friday with Katrina and all day Saturday with Katrina. And I hope I see you guys there. Until next time, happy spinning, and I'll see you in a couple weeks. Bye, everyone.